there's a lot of adverts out there which offer you loans. And I wanted to start with this because it's familiar. We went to SBI to try and do our KYC, so many initials, just a week ago. And outside is an advert offering car loans with a picture of a really happy couple because they've got their new car. And then in all kinds of other places, you'll find people offering you loans to buy a mobile phone and tell you how important it is that you have a new mobile phone so that you can connect with people. And on the front of the newspaper during the week, there was a picture of a wonderful new shiny Mercedes, which offers EMI 1%. But then the next thing it says is ROI from 7.25%. Can you get your brain around what does this all mean? They are willing to lend you money to buy the car, and it's very confusing when you try and piece together how much is it really going to cost you. So on the theme which Augustine introduced of traps, finance is one possible trap that is all around us in Bangalore. There are lots of moneylenders of various kinds, respectable and not respectable, who are very happy to lend you money, provided they're confident they're going to get back from you not just that money, but more. That's the difference in EMI, is what you're going to be paying over a year. ROI normally means return on investment. This is the opposite, rate of interest. They're actually going to charge you more than 7% for whatever they lend you to buy your new car or whatever it is. Getting into debt is one possible trap. And we hear about farmers getting into this trap because every year when there's a disaster with the crops of some crop or other, there'll be a few or many farmer suicides because they had to borrow money to get the fertilizer and the seed to plant that crop. And if the crop fails, there are government schemes that are supposed to help, but they don't work well. There are some people who get stuck in debt, which means that although they put in loads of work, loads of effort, their harvest is hardly there. We hear about it with farmers, but it's not only a farmer problem. There are plenty of people who are aspiring middle-class kinds of people who are being offered loads of money, and as soon as you get a salary, as soon as you get an income, the people wanting to lend you money will lend you more and more because they're after your future income. But what if that income doesn't go up? Or if you get ill and you can't work? Debt is today one possible trap. And I'm starting with that because it was also a possible trap way back in ancient world. Our passage about ancient world is also about slaves, which we think, okay, that's not us. We don't have slaves working in our homes or in our farms. Or do we? I mean, the traps today include, and here's a list of things I think it's worth having in mind. Tobacco, it's addictive. Illegal drugs that are addictive. Gambling, which can be addictive. And a whole load of pornography, which seems to be addictive, and other things online that seem to be addictive. I mean, you'll have noticed there are arguments about whether the whole way things like Facebook and things are presenting themselves online is in itself addictive, because they just feed you stuff. They're feeding it, ramming it down your throat, whether your mouth is open or not. So there are many ways that people can get into a trap in our modern world that didn't exist in ancient world. So we would think slavery in ancient world is something we don't have now. But if you look at data on traps like this, globally, they reckon there are probably more people who are effectively slaves around the world today than there have ever been through history. People who don't actually have the choice. They're forced to work for whatever reason, by their government, by an employer who's got them effectively trapped, by moneylenders who may have been the people who got them into that situation. And sadly, in terms of numbers of people, India might be number one in the world. Certainly the latest data I saw graphs of. And where do we find these people? Well, those who go around trying to release people will often find dozens of people stuck in a brick kiln somewhere, in the middle of nowhere, baking bricks, stacking the bricks, loading the bricks, and with no opportunity to escape. Sorry, this is not a comfortable message, is it? We started with praising God. We started with God as our creator. We started with songs of freedom. But let's be real. Our world has not yet been dominated by the freedom that God is offering. Our world is still dominated by the bondage that came ever since Genesis chapter 3. Thank God there are people who try to find those in bonded labour and release them. Thank God there is a central government scheme which is supposed to mean that when people are found and released, they're given a certificate that allows them to claim a lump sum, 20,000 rupees, I think, to help them rehabilitate, get back into life. And yet, most of the people who get released from bonded labour never get that certificate, let alone that money. So quite a lot of them get released from bonded labour into a situation where they still don't have any land to farm, job to do, or income, any way of feeding themselves. They're not released. They're not freed. They will just go back into something similar. And global data on this thing picks out further human trafficking, sex trade, a lot of it, not all of it, and forced marriage, where someone becomes something they never chose to be for the rest of their life. Some of the organizations globally that campaign on this, their internet data is not available in India. The government here is very quick to block anything that they don't believe is helpful on whatever basis they choose. But some of the more reputable organizations, they don't block. So you can see the data. International Labour Organization, United Nations, World Health Organization, they all do surveys. Whew. You didn't want to hear all this. Yes, I hope you didn't. I mean, this is just not comfortable. But I'm starting here, starting with the fact that life is full of possible pitfalls and traps, because that is where our passage begins. It's a sort of an assumption built into Deuteronomy. So, verse 11 said, there will always be poor people. In fact, earlier in the passage, bits we missed out said, there shouldn't be poor people among you. I'm going to bless you in the promised land. The people of Israel, promised a land flowing with milk and honey, are about to go into it. And God says, there shouldn't be poor people among you. I'm going to bless you. But then later in the same chapter, he says, there will always be poor people. Some people will always get trapped in some way or other. It might be their fault. It might well not be their fault. This passage doesn't even think about that. The question is, how should the people of Israel, as a nation, handle God's plan that although life is full of possible pitfalls, possible traps, God wants people to be free. So, one half of the starting point is there are pitfalls and traps. The other half is God wants people to be free. And in Deuteronomy, background again, there's all the story of how Israel got released from Egypt. They were all slaves. They were bonded labor. They were, as a nation, as a people in Egypt, just being slaves. And God in the book of Exodus releases them from that. God wants Israel to be free. And here in Deuteronomy, he's preparing them for going into the promised land to live as a free nation. And this is not just Old Testament. This does apply today. God hasn't changed, except that now he's not dealing with just the people of Israel. God is dealing with the whole human race under special agreement. Israel had the covenant of Sinai, a special agreement. God's special agreement in the wonderful cross that we sang about is now for all people. God wants people to be free. God wants us to be free. So, sneak peek of what I'm about to say. The first thing is, let's be free and stay free. So I think I just have to say that. Don't get trapped if you can possibly avoid it. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's not your fault. You don't see a trap coming. But don't get trapped if you can possibly avoid it. I've mentioned finance traps because that's the background to why people would get into debt, why people would become slaves even in the ancient world. And something similar today. That's not quite what this passage is saying, though. So I don't want to say much about that because this passage is saying, here are things you can do together as a community so that the people that God has got free can stay free. And that's the main part of it. God wants people to be free. God wants us to be free. But God wants people, God wants us to help each other to get free and to stay free. That's the heart of what this passage is about. So we'll look at what it was meaning at that time, but we will look forward to afterwards. What does that mean for us today? Because the situation is different. So God showed that he wanted the people of Israel to be free. In this series, we've already noticed that he wanted them to be free not just from slave masters in Egypt, but from idols, from the religions, particularly of the people of Canaan, the place they were going into, where child sacrifice was a thing. And idols were there on every hilltop, under every spreading tree, as it keeps describing it. And God wanted people to get free and stay free. So we've noticed that he wants people to stay connected with him, God, not all kinds of other things that people present as gods that are not really gods at all. And so this passage moves on to the point that God wants us to help each other. Now, I want to start by just mentioning 3 stories that I'm going to include, which are not full stories, they're situations. Because, again, this is modern world. So one was that a friend who had been a colleague, we were no longer colleagues, but he kept in touch. And he said, look, I've got a family medical emergency. Can I borrow some money? And I knew him well enough to say, okay, I believe him that there's a family emergency, and I lent him some money. I'll carry on that story later. Second situation was someone who a friend of ours knew them well. We knew them a bit from visiting them in prison. And he was coming out of prison. So he was getting freedom. But when you come out of prison, this was... Whoa. When you come out of prison, there is rejoicing in heaven and music. But it feels like a celebration, except that you go out with no life to go to, like being released from a brick kiln with still nothing. So that guy, we were basically discussing before he was released, and it happened soon after he was released. Could he come and live with us in our house, with our family? And because the places where it's possible to get a shelter are full of criminals, full of drugs. It's really hard to get back into life. So that was another question. And then finally, a question of there's somebody we know who used to run his own business, still sort of does, but his relationships with his family are strained, so he's not living at home. His ability to run his business is limited. all because of alcohol. And he really can't stop drinking. These are three situations where people have been in traps. And the big question is, how can the story end well? And that's what this passage is about. How can the story end well? Even though admitting that there will always be some people who end up poor for some reason. And not just poor, but trapped in poverty, like slaves. So, two things are in our passage. Let's look at the detail. First one is about cancelling debts. The second one is about freeing slaves. Both of them are things that Israel as a whole community are supposed to do. The cancelling debts releases people from the debt trap. Now, again, a picture for this. I don't know if when you were at school you ever played tag or it. Is it a game here? Or we used to run around the playground. Somebody is it, and if they can touch you, then you've lost in some way. Well, one version of that game is a statue version, a freeze tag, where whoever's running around is it for the whole game. They just have to go around. If they can touch you, they can shout freeze and you are frozen. You're just stuck there. So that's one game we used to play at school. And it's okay, but that's half of the rules that we used to play by. I don't know if you have the other half of the rules, but think about it. We'll come back to that. Here we've got the command of God to Israel every 7 years, and this is on a regular 7-year basis, fitting with the year of Sabbath for the fields. They've already got a 7-year cycle built into their national calendar. On that year, every debt to every member of the nation of Israel, they don't include foreigners in this, but every member of the nation of Israel, every debt is automatically cancelled. You don't have the choice about it. That is God's command to the nation. So, but then it goes on and says, well, if people are asking for a loan, don't just say, well, come on, next year's the year, you're just going to get that debt cancelled in a year's time. Still give them the money. So you may think you know what loan means. You may think you know what debt means. Think again. So that guy, a colleague who had a medical emergency in the family, I lent him some money. And I got in touch a long time later, 6 months later, maybe more, and said, so how did it go? And I mean, politely asking, but also assuming, being British, I mean, this is early in my time in India, assuming that he might also tell me about the money. Well, actually, he did. So he said, yeah, it was sorted, it was fine. In fact, there was loads of money left over. So I'm thinking, oh, well, he's answering my question. So when's he going to pay it back? And his next sentence was, so I've invested it all in a new web business, a matrimonial site, which is going to make loads of money. So I've been able to set up this new business. He had absolutely no intention of paying the money back. And that's me thinking, you asked to borrow money, and to some extent you used it, and to some extent you've used it for something else. So, in British way of thinking, he's defaulting on a loan. In my British way of thinking, maybe I should cut him off as a friend. I mean, he wasn't that close a friend, and I haven't actually kept in touch, which I probably should. But in Indian way of thinking, and especially within family, you know, if somebody needs money for an emergency and says, can we borrow money? You know it's not coming back. I mean, it will come back if you have a medical emergency and you need money straight away for your bit of the family. The Indian way of thinking is very different from the legalistic Western, here is how loans work, here's the small print, the terms and conditions. Look at God's way of lending. You lend knowing that if they don't bother paying you back by the end of that 7 years, or the next time that 7-year cycle finishes, you're never going to get the money back. That is God's approach to lending. So is that like the Western terms and conditions, or is that more like the Indian? Much closer to the Indian. Still not quite the Indian. But isn't that interesting? That this isn't quite lending. Not certainly the way the lending organizations work today. God is telling Israel to work in a way that is very different from the way the formal systems work anywhere in the world, I think. But isn't it better? So that's one half of our passage. The other half of our passage is freeing slaves. It doesn't use the word slave, but it says if someone sells themselves to you, it means they've become your slave. And what it says in the passage is they will serve you for 6 years, and then in the 7th year, you must let them go free. And think of the brick kilns and the people who get released from the brick kilns. Okay, let them free. But where does their life go from there? The next verse, verse 13. And when you release them, do not send them away empty-handed. Supply them liberally from your flock, sheep or goats, your threshing floor, crops, and your winepress. I don't know quite how they're going to carry the wine. I mean, this is like heavy stuff. But you're supposed to be giving them stuff more than they can carry, is my picture of this. Give to them as the Lord your God has blessed you. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. That is why I give you this command today. You're supposed to remember what slavery was like and never want to go there again yourself. Don't get trapped. But never want anyone else to have to go there either. So God wants us to help each other, cancelling debts and being willing to make a loan into a gift effectively, and freeing slaves. It's worth adding that it's not in our passage, but they also had a system, not just every 7 years, but a system for every 49 years of the year of Jubilee, when every Israelite family got back the land they were given by lot when they first arrived in the land. The whole land was split out by lot, family by family. And you could sell it if you ended up needing to. You'd do that before you sell yourself as a slave, wouldn't you? So these people who are selling themselves as slaves, they've already sold their land. They've already done all they can as a family to try and survive. And in desperation, the only last safety net is maybe someone will buy us as slaves. That way they'll feed us. That way they'll look after us because we'll be able to work for them. It's a safety net. So modern world, we may say, well, slavery is immoral. And I guess when there are other safety nets we could put in place, slavery becomes immoral. In ancient world, there was no other kind of safety net. They would literally starve to death if somebody didn't take them on and feed them. So, he wants us to help people to get free, and the 49th year would mean that they could eventually get back their family land and have a way of farming again, a chance to be back to square one, a fresh start. So, I think I wanted to carry on the story of our friend who came out of prison. He came out of prison with basically nothing. It's very hard to get a job if you've been in prison. He did come and live in our family with us for a while. And he eventually managed to build relationships, build status in the community, work out things he could do. He's actually quite good at stuff. In his case, he ended up marrying, settling down. He's passed away now. And actually playing a significant part in a lot of people's lives. He helped to run a Christian festival. And wherever he went, he ended up living in Europe for some time, both of them as a family. So, in this case, coming out of prison with almost nothing, all we did was provide a home. We did no more than that. And yet, God did launch him into a life that was, what, normal? More than normal, extraordinary. God doesn't want us just to be normal. He wants us to be extraordinary. So, free? Yes. He got free and stayed free. So, freeing slaves in the ancient world was a bit like that. It wasn't enough just to say, okay, you're free now, but with nothing. The gift they went with was vital for them to be able to stay free. You need a leg up to get started in life, whether you're on your own or with family. And sometimes perhaps slaves would be freed as a family. So, what does this mean for us? Well, our world is different, but some of these things are still the same. I think it's worth noticing this is laws for a whole nation, and it's not the laws of India. India doesn't acknowledge slavery, but it doesn't have very good laws for helping release people from bonded labor either. India certainly doesn't have laws about cancelling debts. So the situation is different. When we apply this today, we can imagine what India could be like, or any nation could be like, if it only had godly legal system and godly people wanting to live in God's way, with God's blessing, helping each other get free and stay free. We can imagine that. Sadly, a lot of the countries in the West that have had opportunity to claim to be Christian countries have really not done this. Britain, where I'm from, Britain was leaders in the slave trade. Lifelong slavery, not 7-year slavery, for ages. I mean, thank God eventually they became leaders in the movement to abolish slavery. But you know the colonial history. Countries that have called themselves Christian have not lived up to God's standards. So what's going on? A legal framework is not enough. What God was providing to Israel was more than a legal framework. He was giving them a relationship. And that's the difference. That's the secret. That's what's really needed. So, let's think about what's different in our world today. What's different since the wonderful cross we've heard about? Well, we may not be setting laws for our nation, but we have opportunities to work out how to live as a community and how to live for ourselves personally. So, for Israel, I think it's probably worth mentioning that the way things worked out was there really were poor people in the land, as God had said. There needn't have been, but there were. Israel didn't stay faithful, which is why they ended up going into exile, and effectively, having been saved from slavery in Egypt, they ended up being slaves of the Assyrians, and the other half going off to become effectively slaves, prisoners of war in Babylon. They went back, not because God failed to keep his promise, but because they failed to live God's way. They failed to keep God's commandments, their part of the agreement, the relationship with God. So, I want to end by moving forward into the New Testament, because when it comes to freedom, Israel failed, but Jesus didn't, and we needn't. Galatians chapter 5, Paul says to the believers, the believers in Galatia, who are not Jewish, although there are people who are saying, come on, you've got to become Jews. To the Galatians, Paul writes, it is for freedom that Christ has set you free, or set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. That yoke he was talking about was legalistic religion. One trap is getting caught into a religion that is not there to free you, but there to trap you. And I think there are religions that are like that, and it's possible that every religion has become like that because religion itself, as a human institution, allows ambitious and powerful people to impose their power on other people and to exploit them and trap them. So you may hear about the danger of cults that are trying to do that on a small scale. But arguably, the so-called respectable world religions do exactly the same thing. You try leaving one of the world religions, how much pressure is there? It's like the moneylender saying, you think you can default on the loan? We're coming to get you. Christianity has sometimes been like that too, but not the true faith, not the true Jesus-following movement. It is for freedom that Christ has set you free. Christianity is supposed to be releasing people. God does not impose. Each of us does have the freedom to choose. God always gave Adam and Eve the freedom to choose. We may choose badly, and we are surrounded by people who have chosen badly. We will remember times in our lives when we have chosen badly. Thank God this is not the game of freeze tag where you get touched. You're a statue. You're stuck there while it goes around and captures everyone else. And the game ends with everyone as a statue. And it has won. Thank God there's another rule in the game of tag. What is the other rule in the game of freeze tag? I don't know if you play it the same way as I used to. Someone can unfreeze you. Anyone who's still free can touch you and say unfreeze. And you're unfrozen again. When you're trapped in debt, the person who has that debt is told to unfreeze you after a time, but no more than 7 years. When you're trapped in slavery, the person who has you as a slave is not allowed to keep you as their possession. They are not allowed to oppress you forever. They're told to unfreeze you after 6 years. The gospel is good news. If you follow Jesus, you're unfrozen from the things that have been wrong ever since Genesis 3, the things that are a mess in our lives, the things that are a mess in our world because our hearts were hard, and God has offered us a soft heart. And because our consciences were full of guilt, and through the blood of Christ, God has offered us washing clean and a fresh start. So thank God for that. And that freedom is one that we are called to share. So how do we share it? Both by sharing the gospel so that people can be freed from sin and guilt and from a hard heart. But also by genuinely wanting to help people. This release from slavery and release from debts doesn't say whether you deserved it or not. It just says it must happen. It's not because you like them. It's not because they deserve it. It's because God wants them to be free. The Old Testament law applied to the people of Israel, but not beyond. But the New Testament gospel of grace applies to everyone. It's an invitation to everyone. So how does that help us? Well, I think it's true to say that it's not just individuals, but our society that is trapped in ways of doing things that just lock people into oppressive structures. Communism, which is supposed to be sharing everything between everybody, has a rigid control. Those in charge are tightly in control. People are not free. Capitalism, we may think, oh, the Christian alternative is there in the West. Capitalism allows people to become super rich and buy themselves power so that people are no longer free. The Christian community has at times, particularly in the West, said democracy and capitalism, this is the Christian way. is not what we see in the Bible. Not if capitalism involves letting rich people get richer and richer and take charge and dictate everybody else's lives. There is this safety net built into God's system. What is that? Socialism? I don't know. It's something that's different. It's not communism. There's people are running their own farms, running their own businesses. Individual work is absolutely valued. People are not becoming simply one cog in a big machine, whether it's a communist machine or a capitalist machine. Somewhere in the middle is something godly, something human that we are called to be part of. And it's not about making money. It's about making relationships. Cancelling debts is not really about the money. It's about the relationships. It's about the people being of value. Releasing slaves is not really about money. It's about the people. So, my last story, our tailor, the man who was trying to run his own business and is sort of struggling because alcohol has got in the way of his business. How can we help someone where alcohol is the trap they got stuck in? And it wouldn't be lovely if we could just sign something saying, right, you're released from this. There is no contract that does that. There is no document that does that. You cannot sign off something saying this guy is free now. And so many other people addicted to drugs, addicted to porn, not just trapped in debt. There are so many things people are trapped in. And if only we could just sign something, say you're free. God's plan is bigger than just the national law or the things that we can do. But let's notice what we can do. Verse 7 of our passage. If anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites, in any of the towns of the land your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. He goes on, I command you to be open-handed. And don't let them go away empty-handed. A lot of hands here. And what's it add up to? The bigger picture of the Bible's story. Our hearts may have become hearts of stone, wanting to exploit people. God has offered a soft heart, a heart of flesh, that we can't just create for ourselves. Only God can give. That image comes in Ezekiel and Jeremiah. Our fists may have been tight fists, and God tells us to be open-handed, willing to help. And you may think, this is going to be expensive, this is going to be a problem. God's after my money, isn't he? But it's so much bigger than that. God doesn't want your money, he wants you. Think how God has welcomed us into his presence today. God is not a God who is hard-hearted or tight-fisted. There's a story in the Bible where David was not yet king. He'd got a band of guys up in the hills who were basically being bandits, I think, but they were like living as a movement who were going to become the army of Israel. David was going to become the king of Israel. But how were they getting by? They were acting as protection. And you may think protection, well, that's rackets, isn't it? It's gangsters who offer protection and then take money for it. That's not the way the story is told. David sent 10 of his guys off to a rich landowner whose sheep had been protected by them and said, it's shearing time, it's like harvest time, this is festival time. Would you like to share anything with us? And Nabal said, who is this David? Who are you? I'm giving stuff to my shearers. I'm not giving stuff to you. Now, at one level, you'd say, is David operating as a gangster? The Bible story does not ask that question. But the Bible story does represent Nabal, as a fool. He was a man with a hard heart, with a tight fist. Thank God his wife Abigail had a soft heart, an open hand, and insight into what God was doing. And that's the key part here. It's not just a rule of life. It's a relationship with God that makes the difference. God is not like Nabal. We don't have to go there begging, having sort of done what we can to serve, hoping that he might give us something. God is not a hard-hearted, tight-fisted God. He has given us before we ever did anything for him. And what is there that we could do for him that he needs? He doesn't need our protection. He doesn't need our help. But he's got people he loves who do. Let's follow Jesus' example of having a soft heart, having open hands.